28 minutes. Capcom was on its knees after Resident Evil 6. Yes, because Resident Evil 6 was dog shit. I remember buying Resident Evil 6 day one and then being so disappointed afterwards. I was like, what the fuck is this? I don't even think I finished Resident Evil 6. That's how upset I was with the game. I went like halfway through it and then I was like, yo, get this shit out my face.
There must be a reason, right?
With Monster Hunter Wilds breaking Steam records and Resident Evil more popular than ever thanks to Village and a handful of stellar remakes, it's almost as if Capcom is incapable of failure. But that wasn't always the case. Less than a decade ago, after a string of critical and commercial flops, Capcom was on its knees. It had lost its way and its audience.
Many of us started feeling that what the fans and players wanted from the series was getting a little bit separate from what we were making.
Capcom was suffering from an identity crisis. Resident Evil, which established the survival horror genre, had lost its bite after Resident Evil 4. Another big hitter, Street Fighter, was on the ropes after the poorly received Street Fighter V. It could have easily been the end of Capcom and its much-loved games. But in the darkness, there was light. A change in the way Capcom made its games, supported by a powerful new game engine, gave these much-loved series a new lease of life and kickstarted...
Is this the new game engine you guys keep talking about? Capcom is using it in Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, and Resident Evil? Bruh, you think they're gonna update that engine anytime soon?
Years of critical and financial success.
I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with the engine. I think it looks fine.
Catapulted Capcom
it's carrying
back
hard
into the big league. 2016 was a bad year for Capcom. The big Resident Evil...
What was bro shooting at? No, we're not gonna glaze over that. My man was shooting at the stairs.
2016
Where is bro shooting at?
Was a bad year for Capcom. The big Resident Evil game released that year was Umbrella Corp, an online co-op shooter that was pummeled by reviewers and fans alike. Meanwhile, Street Fighter V was met by a collective eyebrow raise from longtime fans who could hardly believe this lackluster fighting game was the sequel to the brilliant Street Fighter IV. And Dead Rising 4, which featured the long-awaited return of beloved photojournalist Frank West, would end up being the series' final new entry. This was the low ebb of a string of forgettable years Capcom had endured since 2010. The mainline Resident Evil games were met with diminishing critical reception despite strong sales, Street Fighter was on the ropes thanks to a poorly received new entry, and Capcom mainstays like Devil May Cry were nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, the company's most popular and successful franchise at the time, Monster Hunter, was huge in Japan but struggled breaking into international markets. All of this is a far cry from the Capcom we know today, but achieving this success took more than simply learning from past mistakes. Capcom had to rethink its entire strategy, from the types of players it targeted to the technology it used to make such a turnaround possible.
So it was a few factors that came together, the change of the engine, and also all teams were given a very clear goal at that point.
That's a fire statue behind him.
Market and are fun for everyone.
Around the time of Street Fighter V's release, Capcom underwent an internal reorganization to prepare for its new generation of games. These would run on the company's brand new RE engine, which replaced the aging MT framework engine. Additionally, there was a new mandate to help Capcom set itself up for the future. Rather than make games for existing territory-specific fans, it would now make them for a much bigger and broader global audience. Capcom was founded in 1979 as a maker of electronic game machines, or capsule computers. It rose to ascendancy during the 80s and 90s thanks to 2D games like Street Fighter and Mega Man, and then made the all-important jump to 3D with games like Resident Evil. Between 2000 and 2010, Capcom successfully transitioned many of its big golden era franchises into the modern age, a process that gave birth to one of the greatest games of all time, Resident Evil 4. 2005's Resident Evil 4 is considered by many to be a generational high point thanks to its ingenious mix of horror and action, but that mix altered the course of the Resident Evil franchise dramatically. At its core, Resident Evil 4 is a horror game inspired by the likes of Friday the 13th, H.P. Lovecraft, and the works of John Carpenter.
Oh!
but sprinkled between the strands of its horror DNA are tremendously effective moments of Hollywood action cinema. Unfortunately, this ideal balance between horror and action was lost in subsequent games. In 2009's Resident Evil 5, hero Chris Redfield punches a car-sized boulder with his bare fists.
Fire! Bro, I don't care what anybody says. That shit was cinema. Especially playing this shit as a teenager. When I saw this scene for the first time as a teenager, I said, nah, this man Chris is raw as fuck. This game is fire. This is one of my favorite Resident Evil games. No kizzy.
And infected enemies are gunned down in a car chase sequence that's more fast and furious than frightening. The series was losing its identity, and this was clear.
You said the horror was gone? Cap. There was still some scary shit happening in this game. Whenever you were in the village, there was mad scary shit, like crocodiles, the roach monsters, the dark caves. There was some horror aspects in this shit. You said, Retro, no one will agree with you. I don't care. I'll stand on this hill and I'll fight all of you off. I'll have a spear. I'll pick y'all. Fabrinsky coming up. No, Retro, you're wrong. You're wrong, you fucking Dominican. I'm gonna hit y'all off. I'm standing on this hill.
Both players and the developers.
Overall, throughout the Resident Evil series, we set up different goals, challenges, and things we want to try with each game. But this time, many of us started feeling that what the fans and players wanted from the series was getting a little bit separate from what we were making.
This directional confusion would result in games like 2012's Resident Evil 6, a game that tried to have its cake and eat it too. In order to please both action and horror fans, Resident Evil 6 split the game between 6 playable characters and 3 unique storylines. Each section catered to either horror or action fans, and so never achieved that all-important balance of both genres, which ultimately left nobody truly satisfied. Disgruntled fans shared their disappointment in these new action-packed Resident Evil games online, while the developers continued experimenting with spin-offs that ventured into new territory, like online co-op. This downward trend was not—
Yo, that's so true. I don't know what it was with Capcom. Like, there was a time frame where they kept on making Resident Evil games on like this online co-op mercenary mode. Like, they were fiending to get people into that shit. I never played any of these online co-op shits. Were they any good? Anybody play them?
Exclusive to Capcom's survival horror series, though. Not so long after the release of Resident Evil 4, the company's Street Fighter team was also flying high. Street Fighter 4 was an instant hit thanks to its unique art style and great cast of new and returning characters. It became an immediate hit at fighting game tournaments and in college dorms alike. But like with Resident Evil, Capcom failed to match those highs with a sequel. Compared to its imaginative and full-fledged predecessor, 2016 Street Fighter V was criticized for releasing bare bones with hardly any single-player content, as well as its abysmal online functionality. Fans cite a clear lack of polish and a confusing philosophy towards balance that made the overall experience just plain frustrating. But it wasn't just Street Fighter and Resident Evil that were struggling. Almost every key franchise struggled to make a mark.
Funny enough,
Devil May Cry,
I
the studio's
actually really
popular
fucked
heavy
with
metal
Re-6.
action game, was
I'd
seeing
get Cherry
diminishing
pregnant,
returns to the point
no questions
where Capcom
asked.
outsourced the next game in the series.
Thank you, Sir Lux. I appreciate you, man.
2013's DMC Devil May Cry to UK-based studio Ninja Theory. While it's gone on to become something of a cult title, DMC's fresh take on the series' mythology, redesigned protagonist, and sluggish 30 FPS frame rate was met with vitriol from online fans. Perhaps unsurprisingly, after such a muted reception, the series was shelved until further notice. This slate of misfortunes defines the Capcom of the early to mid-2010s. Key franchises struggled to replicate the successes of the past, while others were put in cold storage. New games attempting to capture the Western market, like Lost Planet and Asura's Wrath, also failed to land with audiences. There was the odd bright spot, like Dragon's Dogma, the new dark fantasy RPG from Devil May Cry director Hideaki Itsuno, but for the most part, Capcom's focus was all over the place. It was clear something needed to change.
Asura was fire.
By the mid-2010s, Capcom had begun to enact a number of strategy-shifting changes that would totally transform the company's fate. Such changes had to begin small, and so the first matter of business was putting out the existing fires. Street Fighter V needed to be fixed, And so Capcom enlisted director Takayuki Nakayama and producer Shuhei Matsumoto to help steer the troubled game towards stability. While neither were there from the ground floor of Street Fighter V's development and therefore can't detail why Street Fighter V was released in the state it was, the duo inherited a game that greatly needed some substantial fixes in order to regain the trust of fans.
There definitely were some challenges within the production of the game, and that was part of the reason why I was brought into the team. And because we were in a point in development where we couldn't really make any major pivots or shifts, we had to proceed and move forward in the direction we were currently in, which created constraints on what we could and couldn't do.
Those constraints severely limited the scope of what the pair could achieve. And so, rather than transform Street Fighter V into an S-tier game, much of the work Nakayama-san did was fixing the game's most pressing problems and biding his time until work could begin on Street Fighter VI.
We just didn't really have enough time to address some of the problems and challenges we face in Street Fighter V. And so we basically had to wait for those ideas to be brought back for the initial conceptual phases for Street Fighter VI so we could tackle and do things properly for the next title.
All this considered, why did Capcom not just end Street Fighter V's development and begin working right away on a sequel? If it was such a wait around the necks of the developers, couldn't they just start from scratch?
There wasn't any sort of sense of like, okay, let's just end Street Fighter V and focus on Street Fighter VI. It was more like, while we were working on Street Fighter V, we were trying to figure out what we really wanted to do in Street Fighter VI, content-wise, how we wanted to promote the game itself. Basically, we tried different things during the development of Street Fighter V to see if it worked, and then we took the things that did work and applied that to Street Fighter.
So Street Fighter V was basically the beta to Street Fighter 6, because it sounds like they were testing all their ideas out on this shit before they put it into 6.
It was like the development of Street Fighter V was an ongoing process that helped us figure out, okay,
what was good and what was bad
to do for the next level.
The team treated Street Fighter V as a lab, where they could learn from their design mistakes and figure out what to do differently for the sequel. The years-long process required careful consideration of the game's every core aspect, which informed several important changes. There were numerous updates, starting with the fundamentals like steady improvements to the netcode and character rebalances, and progressing all the way up to new characters, V-triggers, and even entire new mechanics like V-shift, a new defensive move that provided a brief window of invincibility.
This is a very specific example, but towards the end of the development of Street Fighter V, we introduced a new system mechanic called V-shift, which was actually something we were planning to incorporate into Street Fighter VI. But we decided to give it a shot in Street Fighter V instead.
There was a much larger goal for all these improvements beyond just elevating the game to an acceptable level, though. Capcom was on a mission to rediscover the fun. At the end of the day, fighting games should be enjoyable to play, but Street Fighter V had become a somewhat frustrating discipline to master.
We both realized that fighting games are fun, and when you get used to them, it becomes more enjoyable and something you can essentially play forever as long as you have an opponent to play against. However, one of the challenges that we faced with Street Fighter V is that we felt that there wasn't a clear pathway that helped guide players to get to that level where they finally feel like they're having fun and will want to continue playing. So that's why we tried to come up with new ideas and tackle that challenge and new approaches like the inclusion of World Tour, where they can learn more about the backstory of the different characters and actually fall in love with the characters that they are playing with. And we tried our best to enhance training mode and add character guides and combo trials and just enhance features that will help the player improve their skill level.
Street Fighter had previously tried to be more approachable by lowering the difficulty, but this only served to turn off longtime fans. Instead, Street Fighter VI's approach was to expand the tools available to new players while giving experienced fans everything they already loved about the series. While they could have cut their losses on Street Fighter V and immediately tried to win fans back with a sequel, Nakayama-san and Masahiro-san knew that this would be a shortcut that didn't grow Street Fighter in any meaningful way. But by sticking with Street Fighter V and using it as a testbed for new ideas, 2023's Street Fighter VI was able to launch as one of the most critically acclaimed games in the entire franchise.
This will be a good fight.
If we don't challenge ourselves with new things, then we're not going to make progress and we'll become stagnant. And if we try something new and if players don't like it and they say they don't like it, then we'll just build upon that and change that.
While Matsumoto-san and Nakayama-san were able to take the work put into Street Fighter V Arcade Edition and apply the lessons they learned to Street Fighter VI, it was important that Capcom did not repeat these kinds of situations and be forced into having to overhaul games again. A significant shift in strategy was needed that would prevent such a disaster ever happening. And that's where a couple of vital behind-the-scenes changes came into play. Almost all of Capcom's games from the PS3 and Xbox 360 era went all in on trying to capture an imagined version of the Western games market. The action-heavy Resident Evil 4 was a big hit, true, but the more gun-focused spin-offs like Umbrella Corps, as well as the sci-fi shooter series Lost Planet, were all clearly chasing late 2000s Western gaming trends to no avail. After several years, Capcom realized it needed to create games that could appeal to everyone, not just fans of traditional Western genres.
I think that we had that clear goal of just focusing and not holding anything back towards making good games that would reach people all over the world. The changes in the organization,
Dragon,
the engine,
Dogma.
all these elements came together around that time.
Is that a
No
good
other
game?
series embodies this new company goal better than Monster Hunter. While it had its diehard fans in the West, for decades Monster Hunter was much, much bigger in Japan than the rest of the world.
Kinda.
The series was never conceived to be something that was only meant to be big in Japan, but there were real-world factors as to why this happened. Firstly, Monster Hunter found tremendous success moving from the PlayStation 2 to the PSP, with Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. The handheld gaming market has always been much stronger in Japan.
Bro, Monster
than in the
Hunter on a
West,
PSP
as seen
sounds
with the success
fire.
of not just the PSP, but also Nintendo's DS and more recently, the Switch. The popularity of handhelds in Japan is rooted in a number of factors, but the thing that really worked for Monster Hunter was that Japanese gamers were able to reliably play with friends thanks to the widespread adoption of mobile consoles.
20 years ago in Japan, having a network connection wasn't as easy, and there weren't a huge amount of people playing Monster Hunter online. However, handheld consoles made multiplayer gameplay easy without internet access, and I regard it as a great success that we had players experience the game in this way, which is one of the ways we really wished for them to play and enjoy it, even in that era when online gameplay wasn't easy.
Why are you here?
You can't do this alone!
Monster Hunter
You can't do this alone because it's better if you do it with friends. I got Monster Hunter Gen Ultimate recently, pretty fun.
which is built on a core pillar of cooperative play, recognized that this aspect would be best served when friends could quickly jump into hunts together, and there was no better avenue for that at the time than handheld consoles. Thanks to Japan's mobile games market, it meant Monster Hunter was being developed for a local market first, even if it wasn't intentional. This created a loop of sorts. Monster Hunter games would become bestsellers primarily in Japan, and to keep pace with the audience, Capcom would release Japan-only content and host Japan-only special events, further reinforcing Monster Hunter as a Japan-only brand. But the reality was that Monster Hunter did have fans in the West, and they were enviously looking from the outside in as Japanese players received exclusive tie-ins and quests. But as the Western world improved its internet infrastructure and online play became practically mandatory for most console gamers, Tsujimoto-san and the team saw an opportunity to launch their most advanced and most globally accessible Monster Hunter game to date. Released in 2018 on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, Monster Hunter World was a gigantic change for the franchise. Rather than being scoped for small, less capable handheld consoles, it delivered large-scale, AAA console-quality action, with souped-up graphics, bigger areas, and of course, bigger monsters.
You know what's crazy to me is that there's no PS5 version of this game from what I've seen online. There's only a PS4 version. Because remember when the PS5 came out, there were a couple games that had the PS5 quote-unquote upgrade where they like have enhanced graphics and all this type of shit. I'm surprised they didn't do it with this game. You said they fumbled at the very end. You said, yeah, it's odd. You said the game was kind of old at that point. Hell no, but I feel like with the amount of content World has, I feel like that game got so much fucking content.
So starting with World, our approach to the globalization of the series and Monster Hunter in general not only ties into the themes we had going into designing the game, but also in the name of the game. The fact that we called it Monster Hunter World was a nod to our desire to appeal to this global audience, this worldwide audience that wanted to dig into and experience Monster Hunter World, or even Monster Hunter the series for the first time. And that doesn't just come with renaming our product, but also realigning ourselves to hit those global standards that people come to expect of titles around the world. So, for example, with the Monster Hunter series up until then, we'd really been releasing the titles in Japan first with a delay in the localization and worldwide release. Also, sometimes the content would be different in the Japan release versus the US or the worldwide release.
It wasn't just a matter of making sure other regions got Monster Hunter World at the same time as Japan, though it certainly helped. Sugimoto and co. drilled deep to see what other ways Monster Hunter's formula could be tweaked to broaden its appeal with players from all around the world.
For World, we conducted focus tests across the world, and some of the feedback and opinions that we got during that process really affected how we designed our game systems and impacted how much success we had globally.
One important change that resulted from these playtests was simply showing damage numbers when players hit the monsters. Little tweaks here and there to an already successful formula drove Monster Hunter to the greatest heights it had ever reached. Previous Monster Hunter games had typically sold around 1.3 to 5 million copies. Monster Hunter World and its 2020 follow-up Monster Hunter Rise both recorded sales greater than 20 million copies.
Damn.
This explosion of player growth didn't happen by accident. Instead of changing the spirit of Monster Hunter to suit Western tastes, Sugimoto-san and the team found ways to open up the series' unique and admittedly obtuse nature to a wider audience without making sacrifices. This approach has continued with the series' latest game, Monster Hunter Wilds.
At its heart, Monster Hunter is an action game, and that sense of accomplishment you get from mastering that action is an important aspect of Monster Hunter. But for newer players, it's really about getting to that point. The steps involved in getting to that sense of accomplishment is what we're trying to strategize for in terms of designing for new players. So with World and Rise, for example, we were taking great care to analyze where players got stuck, what was hard to understand, what they were having trouble with, getting player feedback, and also doing our own kind of research into that. And all that kind of knowledge has impacted how we've implemented new systems into Wilds.
Monster Hunter had a winning formula. The challenge Capcom faced was finding ways to convince global audiences to give it a shot. But it was not such a straightforward task for every series in the company's portfolio. When it came to Resident Evil, the development team had to decide which of the series' intertwined formula was a winner: gory action or survival horror. Ultimately, it was Resident Evil executive producer
Nah, bro, I hated that survival horror shit, bro. I hated that this big ass dude in a top hat was walking through the fucking house and I hear his footsteps everywhere I go. I hated him, bro.
Takuchi, who made the call.
It was around the time I was working on Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2. I was trying to test different things, try different approaches. And around this time is when the R&D teams were divided into R&D Division 1 and 2. The executive producer of the Resident Evil series, Jun Takeuchi, took command of R&D Division 1, and he set the core direction that the Resident Evil series needed to go back to its origins, to its roots.
Takuchi ruled that Resident Evil must focus on survival horror as its guiding light. This proved to be the right decision. Resident Evil 7 was announced at PlayStation's E3 2016 conference with a moody trailer shot in first person, showing the insides of a dilapidated house. I was there in attendance when the Roman numeral for 7 appeared, followed by the title Resident Evil. The convention hall roared in excitement. There were, of course, questions about how Resident Evil could make the jump to first person. By that point, third person...
I'm not gonna lie, the first person, they kind of went crazy with that shit. Like going from third person to first person, because I feel like that created a whole different element with it. And I played these games. These shits was scary, bro. I hated going to that lady's house where all the bugs were at. And then she turned into that big ass creature with the nasty shit on her stomach. Oh my God. Like, yo, this whole universe had me like, ugh. I was like, get me out of here. I hated it.
Over-the-shoulder gunplay had become synonymous with the series. It turns out, however, that in exchange for moving to a first-person perspective, Resident Evil regained something it had lost. It became scary again.
We will never be a family.
Then I don't need you anymore.
Ugly ass little kid. Freaking SpongeBob ass teeth. Get this little ass girl, man. She would have killed me. Ha 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 ha. The fuck out my face.
With Resident Evil 7, the executive producer, Jun
face.
Takeuchi, made it clear that we cannot underestimate how critical it is for the series for it to be scary and about survival. So he made it clear that Resident Evil 7 would go back to its origins. It would be very cautious with its survival elements.
You said again with the
that as a
teeth?
basis, then we would
You said
try
she
new
spooked me? She did. She did, I remember. I didn't like that.
and different things.
The game was a hit. While maybe not quite operating on the same level as Resident Evil 4, this significant shift in direction allowed for a welcome return to survival horror. Thanks to its unsettling and claustrophobic Southern Gothic setting, Resident Evil 7 ranks as one of the scariest games in the series. But Capcom wasn't going to abandon the third-person perspective that was so key to the series' DNA. While new mainline titles like Resident Evil 7 and 8 would stay in first person, Capcom planned to release third-person games through a series of brand new remakes, starting with Resident Evil 2. Capcom realized there was a demand for remakes thanks to the appearance of several fan projects at the time.
そうですね。はい。
You might have heard of it, but there were some fans from overseas that were working on their passion project, doing their own remake for RE2, and, well, it was like, alright, people really want this to happen. So producer Hirabayashi came up with the slogan, well, we'll do it.
I'll do it myself.
The result is one of the best games in the entire series. The Resident Evil 2 remake is a perfect blend of horror, combining all the action and puzzles fans have come to expect from this.
That sounds crazy to me, though. So basically, they realized, oh, the fans really wanted a remake. They didn't do the remake. Somebody else overseas was like, fuck it, I'm going to do it myself. And then when they realized how much people got interested in it, then they were like, all right, fuck it. We're going to do the remake. And now we're going to shut you down overseas, because if you do this shit, I'm going to hit you with a cease and desist. You better not make that game, because I'm going to take all your money. Fans remastered the game? Oh, fuck.
The series with a new menacing tyrant system that allows the hulking Mr. X to continuously stalk you throughout the Raccoon City police station. Under Ampo-san's direction, Resident Evil 2 Remake became the second best-selling Resident Evil game in the franchise's history.
Bro, I almost couldn't even complete this game because I swear, bro, there was a floor where this man was camping me, bro. Like, I reloaded my save and all I kept hearing was, goom, goom, goom. Door open. Goom, goom, goom. Walks up the stairs. Goom, goom, goom. I'm like, nah, dude, he's camping my room.
Naturally,
Terrible.
Capcom would follow up its incredible success with a remake of Resident Evil 3, another PlayStation 1 game that could clearly benefit from a modern reinvention. But following that, surely Capcom wouldn't remake Resident Evil 4, a game that still felt refreshingly modern despite being almost 20 years old. Why touch something many considered to be almost perfect?
まあ一番大きいのはまず
When we put out the remake for Resident Evil 2, we got a very
Because 4, the fans, there's a die-hard fan base. 4, the remake was great. I loved it.
positive reaction. So that made us think, alright, these remakes are something people actually want. And when it came to RE4, as you mentioned, it was still a title that enjoyed some popularity, a very beloved game that people are still playing. So there was a lot of internal discussion on, well, maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe we don't need a remake for Resident Evil 4, especially because Resident Evil 4 is a game that is so beloved. If we get anything wrong with the remake, people might be quite vocal about their discomfort.
See, that's the thing. You see, I like that he said that. He said we can't get anything wrong with this game. And it's so easy to not get everything wrong with this game. Why? Because you already have the blueprint. You have the original game. Everybody loves the original game. Just remake it. You could change some stuff here and there, but don't change it so much to a point where it's like people are going to be like, hey, bro, now you making the shit different. It's crazy, bro. They have the blueprint. It's like you have the skeleton to the shit. Like, that's why when companies mess up on certain games, like on remakes, for example, I always get confused because I'm like, you have the answers to the test. You have the cheat sheet. It is an open book test, and you still fuck this up somehow. They did change some stuff to fit the remake series, though. They changed some stuff, but it wasn't stuff enough to make it bad. You know what I'm saying? But I've seen some companies where they would make a remake, and then they just do it terribly. The Diamond and Pearl remake, shit. And I like what they did with Ashley in the remake for Resident Evil 4. I thought they did good with her. Persona 3 OST. The OST wasn't bad in 3. I got used to it. But I ain't gonna lie, that fucking frog. Turn that frog the fuck off. I hated that frog.
Comfort.
But despite any initial hesitation, the results speak for themselves. Resident Evil 4 Remake was another bona fide hit. Much of its success comes down to the biggest changes, which were focused on fine-tuning the action-horror ratio to achieve Takuchi-san's goal of keeping the series true to its survival horror roots. And so gone were some of the original game's campier elements, replaced by a moodier, darker tone that still kept the heart-pounding action hero moments. Around the same time as Resident Evil's rediscovery of its horror core, longtime Devil May Cry director Hideaki Itsuno
Also, yo, shout out for them to put in parry with the knife, because I don't care. Goofy ass shit like that is so badass when it happens every time. The fact that you could even parry regular shit and then you could parry a chainsaw with a knife, that was fucking badass.
similar epiphany.
Badass.
After a brief sojourn into the RPG world with Dragon's Dogma, Itsuno-san watched as the action genre began to soften in order to appeal to a more casual audience. And so, when the chance to direct Devil May Cry arrived, Itsuno-san saw an
it's that guy
opportunity
with the
to
chair.
challenge the audience of a genre he felt was in need of a good kick in the ass. He would do so in spectacular fashion, achieved by leveraging the company's most powerful game engine to date.
その頃に
I feel like the main trend with action games was to make action games that were very kind. Maybe, for me, a little bit too kind to the players, lending a hand to the player too much to my liking.
Itsuno took over director duties on Devil May Cry, starting with the second game in the series, and has since helmed every new iteration, save for Ninja Theory's DMC. Following the release of Devil May Cry in 2008, it would be almost 11 years before Itsuno directed another Devil May Cry game. But when he did finally return, he would oversee one of the...
Yo, no cap, I wouldn't even be surprised if they remake Devil May Cry 1 or 2. I wouldn't even be surprised. Because I think they did 4, right? What's the chances? You said they should? That's apparently in the plan.
The most critically and financially successful games in the entire franchise.
If you want it, then you'll have to take it.
だが山
During those 10 years, I was able to accumulate many things that I wanted to do, that I wanted to try.
All I want them to do is that if they remake the old ones, let me spam Stinger. That's all I want to do, bro. Once I get Stinger, just let me spam it. And if they don't and if they don't penalize me for it, I'll be happy. I just want to spam Stinger and have that. Keep it.
Tell the stories of Nero, tell the stories of Virgil, and also technology-wise, there were not just little improvements that you would have when you work on a series consecutively, because the technology, when there's a wide time frame, changes significantly.
This vision coincided with the launch of Capcom's new RE engine. It's the engine that most of Capcom's games run on today. Replacing
You said
the old
DMC5
MT
is the
framework
10th
that had
best-selling
powered
game
everything
in
from
Capcom
Dead
history?
Rising to Monster Hunter World, the major upshot of the RE engine was its handling of photorealistic assets. This gave Capcom's development teams access to higher levels of visual fidelity than ever before. It was also much nimbler than its predecessor, making it easier to implement changes if something wasn't working as it should.
まず R エンジンのコンセプト
So the original concept for the RE engine was to allow for a development environment that was less stressful and could help us make things quicker. Because it's an internally developed engine, when we needed any additional tools, well, we could ask for them internally. They could be fixed somewhat quickly internally and also iterated on. Whatever tools were implemented, we could see them reflected in the engine pretty quickly. So this allowed us to experiment with trial and error in a much faster way.
This proved vital for Itsuno-san.
They make it sound like their engine is something, since they internally made it, like they could just put shit in the game easily. They'd be like, bro, I want this cup right now with the pumpkins in this game right now. And they'd be like, facts, I'm gonna put you in the machine and the cup gonna be in the game. Easy squeezy lemon peasy and you can use it. Is it that simple? That's basically
whose
it.
goal was to make the coolest action game of all time. That meant a lot of trial and error to make sure everything from the way the game looked to the way it played was as slick and stylish as possible.
Oh, the motorcycles.
The RE engine-
Bro, Dante is so extra. Oh my god, bro. Like, why the fuck you got 2 motorcycles? Like, dude, he had so much shit at his disposal. I personally got angry at it. I was like, nah, bro, they gave this motherfucker too much shit. He has a hat, he has shoes, he has nunchucks, he has a briefcase, he has a fucking scarf, he has a cowboy hat. Bro, this motherfucker got everything in his disposal. Like, he's like Link from Legend of Zelda, bro. Like, this motherfucker got an answer to every question.
Combination of rapid development tools and photorealistic capabilities meant Itsuno-san was able to increase the pure style of Devil May Cry.
And he could turn to a devil.
デビルメイクライシリーズは
Devil May Cry is a franchise that stands on being cool. That's what the franchise is. It's about being cool.
Yes, I agree. That's what the series is about. It's about being cool. That's why whenever Dante pops up, or Virgil, not Dante, Virgil, and what's the other guy's name? I ain't gonna call him Shion. It's definitely not Shion. It's Nero. There we go. Fucking Nero, motorcycle arm. His whole mechanic is revving up the sword. And then they had that whole intro cutscene where like they doing flips through the car and shit with the pizza. Bro, fire.
Ever since I took over the series from Devil May Cry 3, I put everything that I, as a person, I considered throughout my life to be cool. Anything I've seen on TV, in movies, in comics I've read, any sport experiences I've had, I try to distill everything I think is cool into what
I love
the
it when they
game
put
is.
that cool shit in it.
Since 2017, Capcom has released a Game of the Year contender on a nearly annual basis. In a time,
You said the director left last year? So who the fuck is going to be in charge of making Devil May Cry cool? Because they better keep that shit in future installments. Like, you know, Dante having his foot up on the chair, eating a slice of pizza, a person throwing a spear at him, the spear hitting him right here, and he doesn't even flinch. He just be like, damn, bruh. Then he got to get up, flip the cape. Woo. Then he's like, oh, man. He always had like some stupid-ass quirky line. He'd be like, damn, bro. I guess it isn't pizza time anymore. I'd be like, why the fuck would he say that? But it sounds so damn cool. Then he pulls out ebony and ivory and shit, and he got both the shits out. And I'm like, only he could get away with this goofy-ass line.
When major studios are struggling to find
Come
consistency,
on, man.
Capcom's winning streak of
You
10
gotta keep it
critically
in.
acclaimed games in less than a decade is a major outlier. Focusing on a central goal of creating globally appealing games, all built with a technologically advanced engine capable of powering a multitude of different genres, proved to be a formula for unprecedented success. The Capcom of today is able to elegantly switch from laser-focused fighting games to tight survival horror to sprawling open-world action RPGs without missing a beat. But what's more impressive is that Capcom's mission of making global mainstream games did not dilute its games in the slightest. Instead, Capcom appears to have found the ultimate balance of keeping its games true to themselves.
True.
Whether that's the pure survival horror of Resident Evil, competitive spirit of Street Fighter, or the unique battle systems of Monster Hunter, all while expanding the audience for these games by millions. Many of Capcom's contemporaries are now finding themselves where Capcom was just a decade ago, fruitlessly chasing trends and losing sight of their identities. But for Capcom, the changes it made over the past decade has resulted in a new golden age that shows no sign of slowing down.
Cool.
Capcom may have fallen, but it has risen up better than ever. For all things Capcom and video games
Facts.
in general, stick with IGN.
Facts. I'm happy for him. Yeah, Capcom been in their bag. Capcom been in their
All
bag.
these improvements and still no new Mega Man game since 2017.
I'm not gonna
Not
lie.
like this.
I'm not gonna lie, bro. I hate Mega Man. Except the Battle Network one. OG Mega Man, smooth head Mega Man, fuck that dude. His games are too hard. I said it. His games are too hard. Too hard, bro. Nah. Mega Man, in my opinion, is like the Dark Souls of platforming. Damn near next to Sonic. Those games, hard as hell, and I feel no sense of accomplishment when I beat this shit. Like, when I beat this shit, I'll be like, bro, I'm turning it off. Yo, Sonic, hell yeah, bro. Have you ever played Sonic, you ever played Sonic fucking Mania, the stupid ass bonus levels? Collect all those stupid ass red orbs. That's just fucking, I don't feel no sense of accomplishment in that shit. I'm like, get me the fuck out of here. Nobody tell them about Ninja Gaiden. Nah, I don't think I'm ever touching that too. Watch people who are ass at Sonic games hurt me. Bro, that's me. I suck ass at Sonic games. Oh, God. Mega Man is really hard too. I can't with Mega Man games. Bro, the Season 2 character where this sexy ass snow bunny that looks like Triple H, I'm about to take a risk.